Welcome. My name is Jeff Malmgren. I do work supporting the primary care networks in Burnaby, and you're at DocTalks Mental Health in Burnaby. This is a presentation of the primary care networks along with shared care and the Burnaby Division of Family Practice. Just a couple of things before we get started. This is a webinar format, but you're certainly welcome to ask questions as you go through. We will have some time at the end to respond to questions. If you can put them into the quick Q&A, we'll make sure that we do get to them. If there are questions that we don't get to, we'll do our very best to get them out, get the answers out to you after the session. Also, this session is being recorded and will be available by video to share through the Burnaby PCN.ca website. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to get up, but it certainly will be available. And in fact, it may be available through some translation on YouTube or through Google. So those are pieces that you can go through as well. I think we can go to the next slide. Do we have the next slide? No? There we go. We have a couple of great presenters today. We're happy to welcome Dr. Jennifer Moore, Burnaby family physician who practices longitudinal family practice. She came from Dalhousie and residency in Toronto. She practiced in Halifax before moving to Burnaby. She's practiced here for 30 years. So I know many of you know Dr. Moore. Many of you may be her patients. She previously practiced obstetrics and chaired the department for 5 years at the Burnaby Hospital. Dr. Moore was one of the founders around the Division of Family Practice in Burnaby, and presently she's on the Patient Medical Homes and the Primary Care Network Steering Committee. She'll be sitting again on the board. She sits again on the board, the Burnaby Division, and she continues to remain passionate about longitudinal family practice. And she's joined by Jessica Walker. And Jessica, I think we can think, Jessica is a PCN social worker. When we say PCN, we call that's our primary care networks. She is a registered social worker with a Master of Social Work. She comes to primary care after an extensive history working in acute and emergency care in Fraser Health, and has expertise supporting clients that have experienced recent trauma and violence. Jessica previously also worked in the fields of housing, addictions, spiritual care, street outreach. I think that with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Hello, and welcome to the amazing, marvelous, and I would say very complicated world of mental health, which I hope really will clarify as the talk goes along. As mentioned, I'm a family practitioner and I practice what's called longitudinal family care and have been for quite a number of years. And needless to say, probably every day deal with mental health with my patients, because I think you have to understand that mental health is far-reaching, and it involves both, of course, the psychological, the emotional, and the social well-being of all of us. And in that way, it also affects how we feel and how we think. And of course, if you have poor mental health, that leads to stress, and of course, onto other, sometimes making bad choices, sometimes ill health, etc. So the two are very, very intimately connected. And I hope that in this webinar, we can explain some of that to you, and also give you some tools to use or tools to think about, and resources as well. So, is it over to Jessica now?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So again, I am Jessica, and I'm a queer non-binary person. I use they, them pronouns, and I work with the Burnaby Primary Care Network as a social worker with them on various different mental health oriented projects and community engagement work. So let's start off by looking at a broad definition of what mental health is. So what is mental health? The definition that we use in our mental health community connectors training is the World Health Organization's definition. So a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. So one of the things that I love about this definition is that it's not just about functioning within a very specific employment-oriented or capitalist-oriented system, but it's about having a sense of mastery or competency in your environment and with your community so that you're not as isolated. There's lots of different ways that people can think about mental health. And so culture, it plays a huge role, not just ethnic culture, for example, different languages, dress, cultural practices, but also family culture. What is the family culture or personal culture that you have, your clients have been raised around to think about mental health? How does that impact the way that they understand their situation, their current lives, and the way that they can improve their situation, their sense of competency, and being able to make changes to their life? So culture does play a very important role in mental health, as well as our understanding of mental health. So as clinicians that are very much often trained in a very Western worldview of medicine and of people and society, then we typically have a fairly clinical understanding of what dysfunction or challenges look like. And so it can shape the way that we perceive our clients as well, our patients. So we have to think about that there's going to be different ways that people present depending on their culture and the range of diversity that is our clients or our patients. So one of the important things, let's move to the next slide. One of the things that we did as part of the Burnaby mental health, sorry, the slide before this, Huey. Perfect. So one of the things that we did as part of the shared care and mental health project that we have been working on for the last couple of years, and that is actually wrapping up in mid-March here, so almost coming up to a closing, is that we did a massive survey of people in Burnaby. We surveyed 343 people who live in Burnaby. And that is a conservative number, of course. This is only people who were able to complete and able and willing to complete the survey, but it was a couple of Burnaby local events like Hats Off Day. And in this survey, even though it's only of the individuals who are willing to complete the survey, 343 people, it's still pretty good for amount of people responses. And 3/4 of these people were currently experiencing mental health issues or had experienced them in the past. And most of these people said that their symptoms were mild to moderate, as in they were mild to moderately impairing their life. 1/3 of people were not aware of Burnaby mental health supports, and about half did not have a family doctor, which I'm sure is not surprising to all of the people that are on this call right now. But what it does impact is not having a family doctor can make it very difficult to access specialized mental health services like a psychiatrist assessment. Some people might not be, as we can see, 1/3 of people were not aware of Burnaby mental health supports, or the significant amount of supports that are available within the community to address the social determinants of mental health. So what is mental health and what are some of the factors that impact our mental health? So looking at this kind of diagram, this was a diagram that I created as a means of like conceptualizing the different categories of factors that impact our mental health. So starting from the center and working outwards, we have our body conditions. Those would be our sleep, medications, nutrition, exercise, illness, intoxicants. Intoxicants being, could be illicit substances or legal substances like tobacco or caffeine or cannabis or alcohol, or illicit substances, as well as hormones. And the other body condition that's not included in here that I do need to edit this diagram to include is genetics. So those are our body conditions that impact our mental health. And then one sphere right outside of that is the way our mind conditions. So the way that we think and feel about ourselves, our level of self-confidence, our sense of positivity or pessimism, our sense of, do we have control over ourselves, our lives, and the world? Do we have positive relationships with others? How do we think about others? Do we think that others are there to support us and others are there to reach out for support? Or do we think that we are alone? And so the way that we think and feel about ourselves and others significantly impacts the next stage, which is, or the next category, which is our social relationships. So these are our social relationships that we as individuals have with others. So as an individual, I have a relationship with my family and the individual people in my family. I have a relationship with my helpers, which could be doctors or teachers or bosses. My relationship with friends, with nature, big one, because we know that connecting to nature is really supportive from a mental health perspective. Our connections with animals. I know that for me, my pet is a significant stabilizing factor in my own mental health, in maintaining consistency and having something to love and care for, right? So these are all relationships that we have as individuals. And that is heavily impacted, the type and quality of relationships that we have as individuals with others is heavily influenced by the way we think and feel about ourselves and others, and our body conditions. So those kind of, the circles build on each other. And then on the very outside, the kind of purple circle, is the societal factors that impact us as members of community. So, for example, all humans on the planet Earth have been impacted by COVID-19. So we, as members of the community of humanity, have been impacted by COVID-19. However, people who are members not just of the community of humanity, but also of specific populations will have experienced worse effects of COVID-19 than others. So, for example, not everyone is going to experience the significantly negative impacts of military conflict, but people who have come from a background where there's war in their country of origin, or who may have gone through a refugee process or a migration process to flee that military conflict, will be greater affected by that societal issue than those who haven't. Another aspect is individuals who live on islands, for example, are greater impacted by climate change and the global changes that has happened in terms of our Earth in climate change. So we, as individual members of a group, can get together to make changes to those systemic factors, but those factors are very difficult to influence if we act alone as individuals, which is why the social category is split from the societal category. So in order to make changes to those societal categories, those societal issues that are impacting individuals, we need to get together in our community with other members of people who have been impacted by those things in order to make changes. So that's a way that we use this diagram, is one of the ways that we explain the factors that impact mental health to people in the community, to clinicians, so that we can all have a shared language and perspective around what kind of factors are within our control and which ones are a little bit more inflexible. So I hope that's an okay explanation of that diagram. Please do ask me if you have any questions or if there's any changes that you think need to be made. I'm happy to take in any feedback for that. And we can move to the next slide. So, as we've discussed, so those societal things that impact us as members of communities, those are what would be considered the social determinants of mental health. They're systemic factors that determine how capable someone is of surviving and thriving in their current situation. So some factors that include social determinants of mental health would be things like disability, gender, race and indigeneity, sexual orientation, might be other factors like poverty or housing stability. Those are all factors that can, specifically the social determinants of mental health are one of the things that we want to make sure to make clear is that the people's identities themselves. So for example, if somebody is queer, somebody is a woman or non-binary or a man, somebody's race or indigeneity, their identity does not necessarily negatively impact their mental health. But the power systems that disadvantage those people and advantage others is what produces the barrier that impacts their access to mental health care and their access to supportive mental health tips, strategies, etc. So part of one of the things that we want to acknowledge as we're talking about the social determinants of health is that as people have experienced discrimination or oppression from those societal factors, that discrimination and the oppression that the individual has experiences can cause trauma and chronic stress that individually or directly impacts the individual's mental health. So it's not the factor itself, it's not the fact that somebody is Indigenous, or it's the fact that not the fact that somebody has a disability or is gay, that is the factor that impacts somebody's mental health, but rather the power structures around it that privilege, for example, heterosexual people over homosexual people. Moving forward, one of the things that we looked at in the shared care project is if there are all of these many systemic structural barriers, how do we support our patients to enhance their well-being, to receive care, right? So this is one of the ways that we looked at and that drove our development of the community mental health connectors training. So we really found that as we were looking at what kind of services are available in the community and why people might not know about some services, is we saw that if you look specifically at only the healthcare system, the amount of supports that are available for people are actually very limited. There's kind of individuals can access services through their family doctor or by accessing Burnaby mental health and substance use. And from there, it's usually they would get maybe a group, maybe they would get a psychiatrist assessment 1 or 2 times and then discharged. And that's not providing necessarily the connection with community that would help people to start challenging some of those systemic barriers, and it increases the isolation of keeping people separate. So what we wanted to look at is if the healthcare system has a fairly restricted or limited supports available, what does the community offer? And what we saw is that the availability of community resources to address the social determinants of mental health is massive. So this pyramid that we have here, we can see that self-care and community care is at the bottom of the pyramid. It provides the stability that all people or those who are interested in engaging with the services are able to access with low barriers and low cost. So that would be self-care activities and self-care supports, and then community or social agency supports through meeting the direct social determinants of health or community programs that include specific mental health supports. As we go up the pyramid, the likelihood of the individual requiring these more specialized, more expensive services is going to be lower, so less need and also less frequency, because you have the community as our base, as our stability, to keep those costs down and to provide extensive care for many, many different types of people, not just those who require specialized care. So that's important for us to think about, and that's why we have included this, because we're going to now look at what are the resources that are even available for people? So we've spoken about how you can access some services through your primary care physician. And I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Moore to talk a little bit about that process and how to register people in the community for a family doctor or nurse practitioner.
Yeah. I thought you were actually going to ask me more about specific self-care, but no. So I guess for the last number of years, obviously, there's been issues around what we call patient attachment. And for several years, Burnaby itself has had two individuals really who've been working on this. However, the province decided roughly, I'd say 6 to 8 months ago now, as part of our new physicians master agreement, we would have to, as physicians, submit our panels. And one of the questions, of course, asked was, were we taking new patients? And if so, sort of roughly what amount? And what, of course, that was one piece of the puzzle, but the other puzzle was to actually set up a provincial health connect registry. And that's what you're looking at in front on your screen. And so you can do this electronically. As you can see, as it scrolls down, it will, there's more information about where you live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it will try to hopefully connect you eventually with a family physician who is in your particular area. I understand too, I think with the call 1-1, if you do have difficulty, if English is not your first language, then we do have language services available to help you complete that as well.
Awesome. Jennifer, Dr. Moore, did you happen to have a question there that I missed before you started talking?
Did I have a question?
Yeah, I thought you said you did, but maybe no.
Sorry, I don't think so.
No problem. So in light of the fact that we have discussed how extensive the supports are in the community for Burnaby residents to address social determinants of mental health, we've created something called the Burnaby Resource Directory. And we're going to watch a video about the resource directory and how to navigate that directory. It is on the Burnaby PCN website, and I believe is going shortly. The website is going, or the link for the thing is going to be live. So Huey, maybe you can correct me if I'm...
Hello and welcome to the Burnaby Primary Care Network's resource directory. This video will show you how to use the resource directory table view. The resource directory includes both medical and social resources, focusing on those that offer services in Burnaby, BC. The table is best accessed through a computer, laptop, or tablet rather than a phone. Click View Larger Version to view the table full screen. You might see the resources in a table view or in a gallery view. This video will demonstrate using the table version, but the functions work the same in both views. Each resource is represented by one row in the table. Scroll to the right to see more information about that resource. Each resource has a name, a description of what the resource is, a website link, and phone number. There are also tags associated with each resource to make searching the directory easier. The Focus Area tag denotes one or more broad service categories that the resource focuses on, such as mental health, family and parenting support, or social connection. The Type of Support tags note types of activities the resource offers, such as coaching, assessments, or case management. The population tags describe the groups of people the resource aims to help, such as parents and caregivers, or newcomers, immigrants, and refugees. The age category tags denote which age groups the resource supports, such as children and youth or seniors. Languages offered describes what language the service is directly offered in and lists interpretation available when the service uses third-party interpretation. Method of access notes whether the resource takes place in a group or individual setting and whether it is online or in person. Locations served approximates whether the resource offers its services in Burnaby, the Fraser Health region, or across British Columbia. To find the specific areas served by a resource, look at the description or go to the resource website. Level of care categorizes the resource into primary, secondary, tertiary, or community care. Eligibility details include information about who is able to access the services. Go to the resource website to learn more. Family physician or nurse practitioner needed notes whether a primary care provider needs to complete a referral for you to access the service. Cost denotes whether the service is free or has an associated cost. Search resources by using the filter, group, and sort functions. To fine-tune your search, click Filter, then click Add Condition. Click the drop-down column on the left side to select which field you'd like to filter by. Click the drop-down column in the middle to select how you'd like the term you enter to be searched. For example, you might want your search results to match the term exactly, or you might want them to contain the term. Then, type the term into the box on the right, or select one or more of the options in the drop-down menu on the right side. You can add additional conditions by clicking the Add Condition button. Remove conditions by clicking the trash can icon to the right of the condition. If you search for a language, be sure to also add a condition for interpretation available, as the service may offer third-party interpretation for that language. If you add a condition, you can select whether you'd like both conditions to be true or either of them to be true. To batch resources with the same tag, click on the Group button. Then click the field you'd like to group by. Add subgroups by clicking Add Subgroup. Remove groupings by clicking the X symbol to the right of the condition. To sort resources, click on the Sort button. Then click a field to sort by. You can sort by ordering by choosing first to last, or sort alphabetically by choosing A to Z. To add additional sorting conditions, click Add Another Sort. To remove sorts, click the X symbol to the right of the sorting condition. To print resources, click View dropdown or click the three dots in your toolbar and select Download CSV or Print View. The resource directory is updated annually. Some information may be out of date. If you notice something is incorrect, please submit an entry in the form on the Submit tab. You can also submit an entry if you notice a resource is missing from the table. Enter your name, email, and organization so we can contact you if we have questions. Please indicate whether it is a new resource or an information update for one we have listed. Please include a description of what to change or add and a link to the resource webpage if there is one. Thank you so much for watching our how-to video. Email burnabypcn@burnabydivision.ca if you have any questions or feedback.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to turn it back over to Dr. Moore and move forward with to Jeff for some question and answers.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Dr. Moore. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I have a couple of things I'd like to ask about. Maybe start with Dr. Moore, particularly in your practice, Dr. Moore. I mean, we hear that mental health issues, obviously, right across our population are increasing. But how does that show up with your patients? I mean, I don't think they always come in the door and say, I have a mental health issue. And how do I mean, is there a way that you can kind of talk to how people show up and maybe how they might want to talk to their doctor as they recognize pieces?
Right. Well, many of them probably don't always recognize that initially. I guess I'm also fortunate enough that because I've been in practice long enough, I've seen many of my patients for many years. And so probably have developed some instinct when I know that they start talking about their toe hurting. And, I know the background of what's going on in the family, and I'm wondering if that's really the presenting issue. No, I think it's very difficult. Probably some of the more common times that I will see people present is, say, with gastrointestinal issues, gas, burping, whatever, or abdominal cramping, and yet, if you examine them, you go through sort of some of the standard red flags, as we call, and really, none of them are there. And yet, you still have this person in front of you who obviously, and sometimes they're avoiding doing things, they take days off from work or they don't go to visit, and you have to try to back, while you can send them for some investigations, we'll often start there. Many times, particularly with gastrointestinal issues, I will sit down and talk to them about how it has a neurological system as well, and that we need to think of it in that terms, and what else might be going on that is triggering your stomach to say, no, I don't want to eat, or, I feel nauseated when I eat, how are you? And then sort of spread on from there to more general things like, are you sleeping well? Well, you're not sleeping well. Why are you not sleeping well? Is it because you've, maybe got underlying some reason for it, obstructive sleep apnea, or is it because you're very anxious about your new job or the layoffs at work or whatever it may be? So you're always kind of peeling back these, peeling back the layers to try to find out what the real issue is. Many people these days, because I think they've learned a language, and I kind of had mixed feelings about the use of our phones. Because sometimes I see people sort of getting into those dark holes because, it seems to be okay to talk about how anxious you are. And that does sort of, worry me a little, because usually, these things are sort of magnified, because if you're going to leave a message, if you're going to get anybody's attention, then you have to sort of, blow it up or make it exciting, right, in order to get somebody's attention. So I worry, a little bit about that. But the flip side is that people, I think, also then have a language to talk to people about as well. They will come in and say, I have been really anxious recently. And that I don't think was the case so much 20 years ago, but certainly seems to be now. Is that positive or negative? I'm not sure, but it certainly works. It's certainly worth exploring too.
And I guess it's not all, I mean, I'm going to ask it. It's not always one thing versus the other. There may be a mental health issue that someone is facing, but they may also have other physical issues and the two impact one another. Is that something that's complicated for you and for your patients in particular?
Oh yes, because I think we tend to be driven by the physical, unfortunately, but again, as I would say, Jeff, sometimes people simply don't have the language to talk about how they're feeling. And when I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking that maybe we should be telling everybody not just to get up in the morning and exercise, but also to exercise their mind In other words, how am I going to approach today? What, am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling stressed? Am I not feeling happy? If not, why not? And I do think I think it is very important. I think all too often we don't tend to self-reflect on our own mental health.
Yeah. Jessica, I have a question for you. You were talking particularly about some of the specific groups in our population that are even more heavily impacted or find it harder to find the supports that they need. Where do peers come into play? People in your own community, or whether they're formal peer groups or even informal peer groups in your own community, are those an asset that people understand? And is there a way that we can point people in those kind of directions?
Yeah, so I think it's incredibly important that people connect with members of their own community to be able to access services, because we understand that things like a language barrier or poor competency with English can significantly impact their ability to be able to access services, to be able to manage their own affairs, their family's affairs. So connecting with particularly language groups that are peer supports with other folks who speak the same language as you, that can provide information regarding what the system looks like compared to, for example, compared to another country that they may have come from, right? So I know, for example, there is an organization called Umbrella, which is a health coalition for the population specifically of recent immigrants to Canada. And they have a really wonderful group of like an Afghanistani support peer group. And so they can provide description and explanation of how the Canadian healthcare system differs from the Afghanistan's healthcare system, and why people might be having difficulty accessing specialists or anything like that, because the way that we do our healthcare here is all through a family physician, right? It's our gatekeeper is our family practitioner. So that person would then refer us on to specialized services. But if we come from a place where that's not the system, you're supposed to find your own specialist and connect with them directly, then even knowing who you connect to is a big barrier for many, many people. So absolutely connecting with local community resources and the peer groups within those resources is so key. So there's lots
in particular, for some of the folks of the marginalized groups, but being able to talk to someone with lived experience and share that must be extremely valuable.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that people who have never gone through the immigration experience in Canada, especially as people of color, I don't think if you haven't been in through that and you're not a person of color, that's not going to be something that you even understand the level of complexity that is involved for those folks and the amount of trauma and hardship they may have experienced. So meeting with and validating that experience by meeting with other peer supports is so key.
So, and this is kind of a question for both. Sorry. It's to me, where our mental health issues, our extreme mental health issues end up showing up is in the emergency room, which is probably the very worst place that someone with mental health issues could be. We put these resources up there and they're great, but is there a way that we can divert people earlier from the emergency room? I mean, I know obviously, hopefully they talk to their family doctor, but what if not? What are there other resources in the community specifically that people could turn to before they make that step?
Absolutely. I think we all have been hearing more and more about the urgent and primary care centers. And I think that those are meant as a significant factor to start offsetting some of the visits to the emergency department, right? To and individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis, really an urgent and primary care center would be more appropriate for them than an emergency department, where they might be waiting 8 to 12 hours sometimes to see a psychiatric nurse, and then potentially, depending on what time of night they go, they may be waiting overnight to see a psychiatrist in the morning, right? So it can be really, really difficult for people. So the urgent and primary care centers are an excellent option. You don't need a family practitioner to be able to attend the urgent and primary care centers or clinics. There's one in Metrotown and one in Edmonds at this time. And it's not a perfect system. We're still actively working on improving those, improving access, improving lessening wait times, and making sure that people don't get turned away. But it is a new thing that is coming up that is really helping people instead of using the emergency department kind of as their go-to means of support. There's also counselors and social workers that work at the UPCCs. And so if somebody needs to see a counselor or needs to see a social worker and doesn't have a family practitioner, they can go to the UPCCs and be able to speak to a counselor and get short-term counseling for free. And they can speak to a social worker for support.
And I think that dovetails nicely into a question that we have in the chat. If you were interested in one of the services or the supports that actually need a referral from a doctor and you don't have one, how can you do that? And is the answer, maybe Jessica, I'll ask you to confirm, can they get those referrals from at the UPC, at the urgent primary care centers?
Yes, and the vast majority of community services do not require a physician referral or an FP referral. So they typically can be accessed through self-referral. There's only a small percentage of programs, and typically those programs are already embedded in the healthcare system that require an FP referral to be able to access them.
Right.
So typically people can self-refer.
In particular, they could receive through the UPCC if they were.
Yeah.
UPCC.
Yeah.
Great.
I think.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think two things. Your comments are very well placed, Jessica. But I do think you also be a little bit careful, understanding that mental illness is a spectrum. And at some point, there are people who are, severe enough who do actually need to be hospitalized, and taking them to a UPCC center is not going to be appropriate. The other thing too is that I think is coming and has been in Vancouver for a long time is that if families were at home and had someone, say, who was threatening them or was threatening to commit suicide or whatever, there has been in Vancouver, at least for quite a while, a team actually from the police that actually goes out with a psychiatric nurse to the home. So I'm just putting that as being, on the other, on the far spectrum, which nobody hopes that, we
actually have that.
Yes, I was going to say, I know.
Yes.
But it's just relatively new for us.
There's a couple of questions in the chat which I think might be challenging to answer, but I'm going to put them out there anyway. How can we get help for mental health disorders in other cities except for Burnaby? We're not kind of the pros on this, but Jessica, I don't know if you want to address that at all.
Oh yeah. So it's very different for each community. So really the place that you live and work is kind of the best option to know your resources. But for people in other communities, it really depends. Typically, if somebody is experiencing a really a notable mental health concern, there is a mental health community center in most cities. So like in Burnaby would be the Burnaby Mental Health and Substance Use Center. In New West, there is one as well. There's one in Tri-Cities, Surrey. So individuals can go to those centers for referrals and assessment. So that referral and assessment won't necessarily happen on the same day. There might be a delay or a plan regarding they get their original referrals or resources, and then they schedule an appointment with a psychiatric nurse, and then the psychiatric nurse determines if they need to see a psychiatrist or not, and then they would be given a subsequent appointment for that. So most communities have one of those, and I would likely be able to find a list of those on the Fraser Health website. So I can probably just post the link in the chat in just a moment.
Great. And while you're doing that, Dr. Moore, there's a question in the chat that I think that you will not be able to answer accurately, but you may be able to answer anecdotally. What percentage of seniors are on antidepressants?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I really don't know that off the top of my head. I think you have to realize a couple of things. So there's a couple of medications that we use that are strictly speaking in that category of antidepressant, but we're actually using them sometimes for sleep. If you just simply looked at someone's meds and said, "Oh, you're on an antidepressant," it may not actually be for their mood. In fact, I would probably say, it's an interesting question, because I would say in my population, not a lot of my and I don't, of course, know how you're defining seniors. I assume over the age of 65, but certainly very few of my 80-year-olds or 90-year-olds are on. And there's obviously many reasons for that. Some of them may have been on at some point, and we've slowly weaned them off, hopefully because we've changed the circumstances in which they were functioning often. Not a lot of them have long-term testing on that age group. And sometimes if there's some, issue around their mental status, we're kind of loath to tamper with that, as it were.
Thanks, Jessica. Jessica's posted that Fraser Health link in the chat for folks who might be interested in it. There's another question here, and it's funny, I was just thinking about the same thing. I mean, so often it's great. I think it's Dr. Moore, you spoke to people are learning the language, they become a little more self-aware. But sometimes, I mean, speaking from the experience that I know and have seen, when you're experiencing issues with your mental health, the hardest thing to do is to reach out. The hardest thing to do is to connect, and often as friends or family members, we sometimes we can identify it and sometimes we can't. Do you have any advice for friends and family members who might feel like they know someone who clearly is maybe experiencing some mental health issues, as to how they might help them, how they might get them to the place where they can accept the help that they need?
Yeah. I'm happy to take that one on, that question. So this is kind of the entire concept that underlies our mental health community connectors training, is training individuals in the community for how to have safe, compassionate, empathetic, and open conversations about mental health. So we have a specific kind of acronym that we use for that called ALGES, which is assessing, assisting, approaching, listening, giving reassurance, encouraging professional supports, encouraging informal supports, and then self-care. So basically, the idea of this acronym is it's a way, non-sequential kind of action items that we want to consider when we're concerned about somebody. It could be a patient, it could be a loved one, it could be a family member, a child, anything like that. And our first part of that is creating an open, welcoming, and safe space where you're validating the individual's experiences, validating their concerns, providing reassurance that you are listening to them, that you are hearing them, and that they are not alone, and that change is possible. And so communicating the sense of hope without judgment is really, really key. And then creating that safe space for people to have an open conversation where you're not necessarily telling them what to do or what they should do, but when it is appropriate and they have shared the concern with you, to say, hey, I know that there are options available, and I'm wondering if you would want to talk about that. So rather than saying, oh, you really need to see a psychiatrist, here's how you see a psychiatrist. It kind of sounds like you're having some issues, or you're having some mental health problems and you just need to go see a psychiatrist and get some medications, right? That's much less helpful for people than focusing on having a very open, compassionate, non-judgmental conversation and saying there is options for change and there is opportunity for change. There are services available. And would you like me to discuss those with you? And getting permission and active participation from the individual that you're concerned about so that they are active in their own recovery from mental health.
And Dr. Moore, I wonder if you must get the same thing where people come to you and say, my child, my mother, my where and what advice do you give them?
Well, that's sometimes very difficult because sometimes, and we've already talked briefly about it, about, the resources. There are actually lots of resources out there, but there's sometimes barriers as well. We were just joking about this the other day because I was cleaning out an office and I found two of the, these are postpartum for perinatal depression workbooks that I have, and they're probably about 10 or 15 years old now. Unfortunately, and my office assistant said, oh, well, everything's online. And I said, yes, but it's surprising how few people will actually, even when you give them the website, won't actually go to the website and do that. And I said, by giving the patients this book, I'm reinforcing the idea that this will be helpful. I mean, assuming, as I said, that, I've already assessed the patient at this point and felt, but I think it also makes them take some responsibility as well and say, okay, we're in this together, where this is sort of, a contract, this is the kinds of things I need to look at. And I'm, and on the other side, I'm here to help you follow, and we'll follow up and see if anything in there was helpful for you, what wasn't, did it speak to your circumstance? Maybe we need to change, look at your circumstances. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that, and I love this directory, but even, going through it, you can see, and of course, I'm quite tuned to anything that says tertiary care, because that immediately means I don't have direct access to it either. It is difficult to get some of these. And over the years, there's a program out of Australia called This Way Up, which again is, online, and yet I got the link to, and this was about a common patient of mine that I had with a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, oh, I talked to her, I thought this would be perfect. But in order to do it, your physician has to sign up. So of course I nicely signed up, and the patient didn't, and my next patient didn't either, but I still get their emails. And I'm still part of that program. So, I think when we talk about gaps, we're not talking just about, availability of programs, but how we get to do that next step. And I think one of the things that Jessica has, we talked about too, is, getting them connected in, because I think when they have been connected to someone else who says, oh yes, I did that and I found it really helpful, or I went to the dudes group, or I went to the whatever group, that could be as helpful as me sitting there saying, I think this might be good, but I've actually never been there.
Yeah, that's that role of peer and family. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both. This has been great. I do want to, and we're at time. Before folks leave, there is a brief poll that I'm hoping that everybody will be able to fill in. It's really quick, and it will be very helpful to us. A reminder is that, again, that this will be available on www.burnabypcn.ca, a recording of this session, and as it will include all of the resources we've talked about. You've seen the other resource. It will include a link to that as well. And again, I just really want to thank Jessica and Dr. Moore for your presentation. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'll say have a wonderful day, and hopefully you'll fill in the poll before you go away. Thank you.